Welcome to Harbor.Church Online. We are so glad you decided to join us today. If this is your first time, we just want to say thanks for being here. If you click the link below, we have a gift for you. It's a dunks card just to say thanks for checking us out. Now, we've got a few quick things before we get into the service. The first thing is we have this Wednesday a volunteer beach party. If you're currently serving at Harbor Church, you should have gotten an email from the general church email with information about the beach party. If you didn't get that, reach out to one of your team leaders and they should have all the information that you need. We just want to say thank you to our volunteers for making church happen. We couldn't do Harbor Church without you guys, so thank you so much for all that you do, the investment that you've poured into this church, and for the people that step up week in and week out just to be able to make people feel welcome and make church happen. So again, Wednesday, we're going to be having a beach party for you guys just to say thank you for everything that you do. And finally, on August 15th, we have a Rooted Night. Now, our Rooted Nights are times for us to gather together as a church and go deeper into a topic that we normally wouldn't discuss on Sunday mornings, something for us to have deeper fellowship with one another. But there's a twist this time. We're doing it on the beach. That's right, we're doing it on the beach because right after that, we are doing beach baptisms. So if you would, click the link below, let us know you're coming, and we're just going to have a great time. It's going to be an awesome time of fellowship, of worship, and baptism. So if you are interested in baptism, click the link below to get more information and sign up for that. And it's going to be a great time, and I'm excited, and we're going to kick off church. So let's have a great one.
Comes alive, speak your word and I'm running into your home. 'Cause I have seen your light, bring my word to life, living after your love. I'm not shaking, I'm not letting go. And everything comes alive in my life as we lift you higher. Let your freedom arise in our lives as we lift you up. Sing it out, here we go. Freedom is here. So take the limits off, no matter what the cost. Running after your call, and I will run this race. Face to face, so let your power overflow. I'm not shaking, I'm not letting go. And everything comes alive in my life as we lift you higher. Let your freedom arise in our lives as we lift you up. Sing it out, freedom, freedom. Let your freedom arise in our lives as we lift you up. Sing it out, everything comes alive.
What's up, Harbor.Church? Pastor Josh here. I am so excited for today. Today is an incredibly special day in the life of our church. I am out of town. I am speaking at one of our sending churches down in Florida. They have been supporting us for several years now. Hope Church out of Winter Garden, Florida. I'm going to be preaching there and sharing with them what God is doing at our church. And in place of me preaching to you today, we've got a guest speaker. Not just any guest speaker, but an incredibly special guest speaker, someone who has played a huge, vital part in planting Harbor.Church, in starting Harbor.Church. And if you don't know how the story goes, a long time ago, about 5 years ago, we were looking to plant a church. I knew God was calling me to do something, and I just reached out to some people, and very few people were even encouraging about it. Most people said, hey, yeah, the Cape, that's not a good place to plant. That's not where you should go. But I just shared my heart with a couple of guys, and there was two men that stepped up and said, man, we're behind you, Josh. We want to help you. And you've already met Keith Harrington. Many of you know him as the pastor of Rock Harbor Church in Idaho, and he was behind us. But then there was one other guy, and he's a local guy, and this is important because when I reached out to him and I told him that I wanted to start a church in Massachusetts, and not just in Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, he was excited. He wasn't just like, oh, okay, good luck. He was like, yes, we've got to do this. This needs to happen. And he was so excited that it gave me encouragement, that it got me excited, that I was like, everybody else said it wasn't a good idea. And this guy said, it's not only a good idea, it has to happen. People on Cape Cod need the gospel. And so as I poured out my heart to him, he became more excited about the possibility of Harbor.Church, so much so that he said, Josh, we want to be your sending church. That man was Sean Sears. He's the pastor of Grace Church up in Avon in the Stoughton area there. And man, he and I have been friends for a long time. I've known him for, many years. I knew him before he came out to plant Grace, before I came out to the Cape to be a youth pastor. I went through the same Bible college that Sean did, and he graduated obviously many years before me, because he's so much older than I am. But I always looked up to him. He was a youth pastor in Colorado, and I was a Bible college student. And I knew this guy Sean was tearing it up, and I've always admired him. And then he came out to Massachusetts and planted Grace Church, and I shortly thereafter came out and was a youth pastor, and I've just watched what God has done at Grace Church. And when I reached out to him and said, I think God's calling me to plant a church, he said, we want to be your sending church. Grace Church wants to be your mama church. And if you don't know how that works, you need a sending church, Harbor. We needed somebody to give birth to Harbor. You want that authority, the same authority that Jesus gave to his disciples and said, hey, go out and tell everybody. And Jesus started the first church, and he sent his disciples out to start more churches, and they started more churches, and they started churches, and those churches started churches. That's what you want. And so we wanted that authority. We wanted a church to kind of be that umbrella over us to help us. I needed somebody to speak wisdom into my life. I needed somebody to hold me accountable. And not only that, but to teach me what I didn't know and to help me see what I couldn't see. And Pastor Sean from Grace Church has done all of that and more. Invited me into his staff meeting, sat with me in his office, sends me texts and phone calls, and we talked through things I had no clue about, and just loved us up. Not only did they send us financial support and helped us get our feet that way, but man, the backing, to have the credibility of Grace Church was what allowed me to get into the circles that I got into the Send network, where we met other churches that supported us. We had the credibility of being a legitimate church because we had a legitimate church that said, yeah, we're behind Harbor. And that will mean so much to me, and means more to the life of Harbor than you'll ever understand. And I don't want to take any more of his time. I want him to come up and I want him to speak to you, but I want you to understand who this guy is. This is Pastor Sean of Grace Church, our sending church, our mama church, if you will. But he's also the man that encouraged me. He's the man who not only patted me on the back, sometimes kicked me in the butt, but man, he always had a word to lift me up, and he's given us more wisdom. The DNA of Harbor so greatly reflects the DNA of Grace because of the influence they've had in my life. And more than anything, when I was on the fence of like, how do I do this? Can I do this? He stepped up and said, you've got to do this. You've got to plant Harbor. And so somebody that we have long awaited coming to speak and to share God's word with us is Pastor Sean Sears. Harbor.Church, get on your feet, make some noise, clap your hands, go nuts for Pastor Sean Sears. Come on up, Sean. Let's go. Let's go. Come on.
That's awesome. Yeah, you guys might, after the end of the teaching, you might decide that might have been a little bit too much. It's like, I don't think we should have clapped that much for that guy. It wasn't all that. That might be the most, complimentary, effusively generous introduction I've ever gotten to speak in any church anywhere, so I'm incredibly grateful. One, to be here today. Two, to play a part through our church and what God's done through your church. I've never seen a church in New England take off as fast as this church has. If you guys have been around for a while, you know it normally takes forever for a church to get its first 50 people. And then it rarely, the average, gospel-centered, Jesus-centered, right, outwardly focused church in New England has about 40 people. The average church in America is 100. The average church in New England is 40, and there's fewer of them per person. So there's fewer of them per person, and they're less than half the average size. They just never make it to 100. And then you guys got to 100 like that, and then you own your own building already, the entire thing is impossible. Like your church, it's like they say the bumblebee can't fly. Like scientifically, the wings are too. How many of you guys have ever heard that before? Am I making that up? All right. You guys have heard that before, right? So your church should not exist. That's what I'm saying. The existence of your church and everything about it is just evidence that God has big plans for the Cape. And he wants churches that are really healthy, that are outwardly focused to get done what God wants done. What you may or may not know, but if you Google the top 10 least religious states in the entire country, states 1 through 5 are all New England. Did you guys know that? Number one is, I believe number one, if I'm not mistaken, number one is Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I think we're tied for number one. Tied for number two is, tied for number two, which makes them 3 and 4, is Maine and Connecticut. And then the fifth least religious state in the entire country is Connecticut. From what I understand, 20 years ago, Rhode Island was in that top 10. Now they're number 13, so some church down there is killing it, right? They got them off the top 10 list. And I believe that God's put Grace Church and Harbor.Church and Cape Cod Church and all the other great churches in the area on the map to get all 5 of those other states off the top 10 list, right? Would you guys agree with that? So here's the cool thing is that your story doesn't stop with this building. Your job now is to start other churches and to start other churches as quickly as you can. Because you don't know how much time you've got. I don't know how much time I've got either. What I don't want to do is get to the end of my life with gas still in the tank, right? To find out that I was saving up for something that I wasn't going to have time for. I want to run as fast as I can and go as far as I can until Jesus says, good job. Right? Whatever. I'm a goofy guy, and you did your best. That's what I want. I just want to do everything I can, short of sin, to make sure everybody I know gets at least one chance to know and to follow Jesus. Because other states that are in the top 10 most religious states, God doesn't love them more than he loves us. Right? Sorry. Okay. There's just not as much access to healthy, life-giving, Jesus-centered churches here. But that's what God brought us here to fix. My mom and dad are on staff here at Grace Church. Josh casually did not mention that in his introduction. So, Dad, I think he might be ticked at you. I don't know what that's about. He didn't even mention you, right? But my dad is the executive pastor here at Harbor.Church. And I know from my private conversations with my dad that my mom and dad, both at this stage of their life, I think are most content in ministry than they ever have been in their entire lives. So, as their son, I want to thank you for the way that you treat my mom and dad. Okay. I heard my dad cries a lot when he's up here, right? So you guys are used to this. The acorn didn't fall far from the tree. I'm a little weepy sometimes. Yeah, a little bit of a crybaby, but I get it honestly. You know what else I do? I get emotional when I speak. The other thing is I do is so I look like my mom, but all of my mannerisms are like my dad. So you're going to see me do, and you're going to like, that looks like Ron, that looks like Ron. And I know, and I freaking hate it. I was, like some people when they talk with, like I was talking to somebody outside the service today, and you know, he was doing this with his hands, and I was like, crap, I do that too. And I was like, look, that's what he does with his hand. I said, look how it's, like most people, like they'll put their hands out like this. But when my dad and I do it, we curl our pinkies in. Now, I don't know why we do this, but we do this. That's what we do, right? Like Ron will go like this, right? And like, so I'll do the same thing. You go, oh my word, that's exactly like Ron. And I know, and I hate it. So I was saying that to these guys. So people at our church have noticed that I'm always looking like I'm holding something. So our youth pastor, every time there's a picture taken of me to put on the church's Instagram page when I'm speaking, he puts Subway sandwiches in my hands. He photoshops hoagies in between these two hands. So next time Ron makes it onto your social media page, I want somebody to Photoshop a sandwich in his hands and tag me in that. That's what I want to see. Now, they moved here from they moved here from, not New Hampshire, they moved here from Tennessee, Nashville, is what I was trying to say, Nashville, Tennessee. And my first time to visit them down in Nashville, we got to go to the Country Music Hall of Fame. Not a big fan of country music because I'm sane, but, right, I'm a mentally healthy person. All of their songs are unbelievably sad. Like if you weren't an alcoholic when you started listening to country music, I think it would drive you to alcohol. It's horribly, like emotionally, I'm already an emotional person. I told my wife she loves country music. I was like, I don't think I could, like I don't have the bandwidth to carry the weight of the songs that they sing. They're just so freaking heavy, right? Like I want to pray for the people who wrote these songs. Like they're so sad and alone. Anyway, so they were in Nashville. We got to go to the Country Music Hall of Fame. And the guy who runs the Country Music Hall of Fame, the curator of the Country Music Hall of Fame, director, whatever he is a guy named Michael Gray. Michael Gray and I grew up at the same church in Detroit, Michigan. So he was 2 years older than me, maybe 3 years, but I think it was 2 years. We confirmed that. And so when my dad said, oh, by the way, Michael Gray is the curator for the Country Music Hall of Fame, now I wanted to go to the Country Music Hall of Fame on the condition that we could meet him, and then he gave us, like a backstage pass and, got us in for free, and it was kind of cool. And the reason why I remember Michael Gray all of these years later, and I only know him from like kindergarten to third grade, and then fourth grade, we didn't live in Detroit anymore. But in third grade, my last year there, Michael Gray got into middle school, so 6th or 7th grade. So I guess I'd make him 3 or 4 years older than me, I guess, actually. But in any case, he was getting older, and he thought that he was too big for his football cards and baseball cards. And he had 2 grocery bags full of playing cards. How many of you guys remember when grocery bags were made of paper? Does anybody remember that? And they were way bigger than these tiny white plastic things that rip, right? Like the paper sacks, like it was like gigantic. You could double bag them, and then you would roll the edges over, and that was as good as a cardboard box. Like that's how thick the bags were back in the day. And he had 2 of those filled all the way to the top with loose playing cards from the 60s and 70s. I remember as a third grader going through there, and there's all these rookie cards, and like Jack Youngblood. The only reason I know who Jack Youngblood is, I believe he's a Hall of Fame football player. I think it was with the Oakland Raiders. The only reason why I know anything about him is I have his rookie card, or I should say I had his rookie card because I've got a story to tell. So when we moved, so I had all of these football cards that are worth, like what would they, like right now, like football cards and baseball cards and all that, like those are like really hot commodities right now. How many of you already knew that? Raise your hand. Even if you're online, you guys could raise your hand. So that you know, like right now, it's a really good time to be investing in these things. And like if you tried to buy the Topps set, like the whole set of all the NFL, you used to be able to buy those at Walmart. You can't find those anywhere anymore. I went to Topps website, and they're sold out, and like the next few editions or whatever the different runs of those are all spoken for. They're just gone. You can't get them. And I had 2 bags of them from the 60s and 70s. And then we moved to Florida. We get to Florida, I'm going into 4th grade, so I'm not contributing much to the unpacking of our house. All of the adults are doing that, but I'm waiting for all of my treasure to get off the U-Haul and into my bedroom. And I'm waiting, and then all of the movers are done, and it's nighttime. Everybody's gone home. Dad's already returned the truck, and I can't find my football cards anywhere. So I went to my mom and said, hey, Mom, where are my football cards? And she goes, your what? And I said, my football cards. And she goes, oh, you remember that garage sale we had? Oh, I know, I was there. And I said, yes. And she said, I sold them. And I said, how much? And she said, $5. Which is the reason why I don't speak to her any longer. Unless I have to. $5, holy crap. $5! Can you imagine what that would be worth now? Putting all those cards on eBay, right? Like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't be preaching for the check this weekend here at Harbor.Church, right? I'm kidding. My point is, like, who knows how much those would be worth? Like, I obviously don't know, because now I remember Jack Youngblood, but that's pretty much, I don't know why that guy stands, because Youngblood, it sounded vicious and like villainous. I think that's why I remember his name. But to this day, I don't know what I've lost. Now, from her perspective, football cards and baseball cards are just cardboard and ink. So her not knowing the value of a football card is going, I got $5 for 2 bags of cardboard scrap. Like that from her, like, what is a football card actually worth? I mean, what it brings to the table is just a 2 by 3.5 inch piece of cardboard with ink on it. That really is, that's all it is. Like, in and of itself, it's not worth anything, but you and I both know that a football card isn't worth what it is. A football card is worth what somebody else would pay to make it theirs. Does that make sense? So its value doesn't come from what it brings to the table. Its value comes from what somebody else would put on the table to make it theirs. And the same thing is true for us. I think that we walk around judging the value of people based on the stats on the back of our football card. If you've been divorced, that's a little mark off, right? That's a fumble. It just makes you a little bit, like in our head, right? If you're broke, if you didn't get the job you want, if you're a high school dropout, if you're single, if you're married but married to the wrong, but wish you were single, right? Like you've got stats. You've got stats that other people printed on the back of your card, and you've got stats you wrote on the back of your card. And all of these things make us feel more or less valuable. But the truth is, all you and I are, in reality, is cardboard and ink. What makes us valuable is not what I bring to the table, but what God would put on the table to make me his. Does that make sense? So my true value doesn't come from how much money I make, how many people like me, how many people come to my birthday party, whether or not anybody throws me a surprise birthday party for my 50th birthday, which nobody did. Just want to put that out there for everybody. My value doesn't come from whether or not my kids respect me. My value doesn't come from whether or not I'm still married or not. Sorry. That's where I'm like, my mom and dad are both crybabies. I really didn't have a shot. We're going to be completely honest. My value comes from the fact that if I was the only person who had ever lived and sinned against a holy and righteous God, he would have shown up in history himself and taken the punishment for my sin for me. That's what God put himself on the table for me. That's what he did. And this idea of misunderstanding value and assigning value differently to different people based on the stats on the back of their card is the focus of Luke chapter 15. That's what the whole chapter is about. It's about the way that we miss the value of the people that are right in front of us all the time. So if you've got your Bible, I want you to go to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, it's my favorite chapter in the entire Bible. My second favorite would probably be Matthew 25, but Luke, not that anybody cares. Luke chapter 15, verse 1 says this: tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. And it wasn't just that they came to listen to Jesus teach. The Bible says that Jesus became known as a friend of these people. If you read the first 4 books of the Christian New Testament of the Greek scriptures, you'll see that Jesus was a friend of publicans and sinners. Publicans were people who worked for the Romans, who sold out their own Jewish, their Jewish, brothers to make a buck from the Romans. They were the worst of the worst. So if you could think of like the bottom of the barrel, the publicans were like even below that, and then the sinners were notorious sinners. They were the outcasts. The people that Jesus was known to be a friend of were people that were not allowed to go to temple. They're I had a speech impediment. I don't know which parent I got that from. Or maybe it was too much communion wine before I got up here. I don't know what that's. I'm just kidding. I don't know you guys well enough to be making those kind of comments. But they were people that were ceremonially unclean and were not allowed to go to. They were the people that you would never see at Harbor. Those are the people that Jesus was closest to. I don't say closest to. It's the people that Jesus always made time for. They were the people that felt most comfortable around him. You know what? The people farthest from God felt most loved by him. Isn't that crazy? That Jesus went out of his way most often for the people that most felt farthest from God. And this bothered people. That Jesus, he was a friend of these kind of people. So they often, and I'm wondering, how many of the people that you and I work with that we would call a notorious sinner, right? Like that's what that verse says. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach, and he became known as their friend. Who are the notorious sinners in your life? Like if I were to say, make a list of all the people that you know and rank them in order of best people to the worst people. Like you would use some type of stat system to rank those people. And my question for you is whether or not the people that you would rank on the bottom of that list would feel most loved by you. I'm not asking if you love everybody on the list. I think if you're a Christian, you'd probably say, I love everybody the same. But the question is, does everybody feel loved by you the same? Because they did by Jesus. So my point in this first part, is that there's a whole lot of us that call ourselves Christians and claim to be followers of Jesus that might not be doing it as much like him as we thought. Because the person at your job that you would never invite to church is the person Jesus at your job would try to spend the most time with becoming a friend of. Right? The people who don't have the same sexual values that you do. The people that don't have the same morality that you do, the people that don't. Do you see what I'm saying? Like we're all ranking people based on the back of their football card. And what I'm saying is that the people with the worst stats were the one. Jesus always picked the fat kid in dodgeball in the first round. He did that. Look at the whole Bible, right? He always chooses the people everybody else overlooked. And there's a whole lot of people he picked that never picked him back, right? He just loved them anyway. Right? Like there's a lot of these notorious sinners you don't ever see in the Bible. We don't get their names. Like they didn't become a part of the story outside of the fact that Jesus wanted them to know for sure that he absolutely loved and adored them. Yeah. Verse 2 says, this made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So the idea that Jesus would be from God and would spend time with notorious sinners so that he could convert them, they might have been okay with. So that he could tell them how bad of a person they were, they might have been okay with. To get them to switch political parties, they might have been okay with. But you're even eating with them, like you're hanging out with them socially. You're not even preaching to them right now. Like you didn't even invite them to temple. You didn't even tell them to go to the high priest and get ceremonially cleansed so they could go to temple. You're just hanging out with them on the Sabbath as though you're totally cool with them. That's what they had a problem with. And if we're going to be completely honest, we have a little bit of that in us. Like it's like it does seem, doesn't it, that the longer somebody is a Christian, the less likely they are to have friends who aren't also Christians? Why is it that the longer we follow Jesus, the less likely we are to spend our time like him? Right? Like you and I, we want all of our friends from church to come over on a Friday night or for a birthday party, and I think we should. Like the Bible has a lot to say about having healthy Christian community in our church family. I'm just saying that Jesus hung out with his disciples all the time. They were his crew, and they were obviously on mission with him. There's no doubt about it. But what I'm saying is that Jesus always prioritized time with those who did not share his mission or even believe in him. The misunderstanding of his character and nature, the idea that Jesus can't be from God if he's hanging out with the people who are farthest from God, so bothered Jesus that he tells them 3 very famous stories. One of these stories, you don't even have to be religious to have been familiar with the terminology of this story. It's the prodigal son. Like that's not a religious term anymore, but it comes out of Luke chapter 15. So he tells them 3 different stories to correct their misunderstanding of his character, his nature, and his mission. And this is the first story that he tells them to correct their misunderstanding of the mission of God, who God loves and how he values people. Verse 3. So Jesus told them this story. He told them this story because they were upset at who he was making friends with. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what does he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? Yeah. Because if he didn't, that would represent a 1% loss of his income, this shepherd who only has 100 sheep. And if he kept doing that, if every time he lost 1 sheep, he didn't do this, his business could survive 3 months and 10 days. And then he'd be out of business. So, of course, he's going to do this. So it's a rhetorical question. Won't he leave the 99 and go find the one? Now, he's speaking to an agrarian culture. They understood the metaphor, and they knew the obvious answer was, yes, that's what shepherds do. They leave the 99 and they go after the one. And that's what he says. Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost? And won't he keep searching until he finds it? Yeah, that is exactly what a good shepherd would do. Verse 5. And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. Now, when he arrives, he'll call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. Verse 7 then says, in the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. And that offended them. Because he didn't say in the same way. He said there is quantifiably, measurably more happiness over the one lost sheep who comes back than over the 99 who never left. That's crazy. So here's what I know from this passage of Scripture, that if you're not a religious person, right? I don't know why you would be here. Maybe you got tricked into it. You lost a bet to your spouse, and now you're paying up, right? Or maybe, I don't know, like if you're not a religious person, what would be some motivations? Maybe you're going through some really rough times right now, and you figure like you're just going to give the God thing a shot, and maybe God will help you. Or maybe you're forced to come here, or you feel culturally compelled to maintain some type of image that you feel other people have projected on you. I don't know, if you're not a devoted follower of Jesus, I don't know how many other motivations there would be, but what I'm saying is that if you're not a devoted follower of Jesus and you feel like you don't fit here, or that you're not like anybody else in this room, what I know on the authority of Jesus himself is that there is quantifiably, measurably more happiness in heaven over you being a part of this service today than over every other Christian in this room combined. That's what this means. And they didn't like it. And he can tell on their face that they don't like it. Like, why else would he go into another story that seems to have the exact same point? It's almost like this ain't sinking in the way he wants it to sink in. Like, the smartest people in the room, they're getting it. But it's the denser people that they're just like, this is a weird sheep story. I don't know where you're going with this. So he goes, all right, let me try another one. And I'm not going to go as sheep on this one. For this one, I'm going to talk about husbands and wives, right? I'm going to talk about some romance. I'm going to talk about the wedding ring, the engagement ring, and the rock you spent all of your time buying, and the fact that she lost the diamond out of the center of the wedding ring. That's the story that he tells next. Verse 8 says, Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house until she finds it, he says. And you might be familiar with maybe some old pictures of this, but in the Middle East, in some cultures, a married woman would wear a headband that had coins on them. Are you familiar with that at all? Does that sound familiar at all? And so this would be a gift, and these coins would be valuable. And somehow she's lost one of the coins on her headband, which would be similar to if a wife lost a diamond out of her wedding ring. Like, Jesus is essentially saying, wouldn't she stop everything that she's doing to try to find that diamond before her husband finds out that she lost that diamond? Like that happened to us. We'd been married for 2 years. We moved to Denver, where I was a youth pastor, which was a lot of fun. And then we had the teenagers come over, and we were painting. It was a rental, but they said you can do whatever you want as long as it looks good. And so we repainted the whole house. That's what we wanted to do. My wife didn't like the colors. And then we repainted the house. She took off her wedding ring. I was in college. It didn't cost a lot of money, but it was a lot of money. Like, I think her wedding ring was $800. And like, this is 1991 money, which is like $1 million now, I think. Right? So that's like a very valuable, like $800. That's a down payment on a house in 91. Not really, but I think it was like, honestly, it was $845. I still remember exactly how much the ring is. The reason why I remember why it cost $845 is because she lost the stupid ring. And we took the buckets of paint and we poured them through pantyhose to kind of hope that it would sift out. Like, that's freaking brilliant. Some of you guys are like, that's actually a really good idea. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to put that on TikTok. That's what I'm going to do with that piece of information right there. Somebody needs that. If you ever lose something in a bucket of paint, you fix it like this, and you pull out the pantyhose. And then we did all of that. So when Jesus says, won't you stop and sweep the whole house? Yeah, we sweep the whole house. Like, we vacuumed the rug, and then we opened up the vacuum cleaner dirt bags, and we went through that also. Like, isn't that what right? Like, that's $845 when your rent is only $270. That's 3 months rent. Like, that's what this, I know you're supposed to save up 3 years? I don't know how much you're supposed to pay for a wedding ring. Now my wife just has a gold band because I don't trust her. That's a little true. Actually, she's got a nicer ring than that, but this one was like, doesn't matter. $845, that's my limit even in the 2000. No, not really. Now I feel like I got to get myself out of trouble, but I'm just going to let it go. And then what she does is she sweeps the entire house until she finds it, and then she does the same thing that the shepherd does. Has a party because there's more joy in heaven over one lost that's found than over the other 9 that had never been lost. And he's looking at their faces, and they still don't get it. Because he tells a third story that has almost the exact same point. Right? Like, why would he do another story? Like, what's the motivation unless it still isn't sinking? Like, the idea, right? Like, I'll get to where he's going in just a second. The third story he tells is the most famous of the stories, and that's the prodigal son story. The prodigal son story is that there's a man who has 2 sons. And in those days, the older son would get twice the inheritance as any other brother, right? And then with the wife, in those days, the dad would give a hefty dowry to her so that she had something sizable, as whatever he could afford to come into that, because she was now becoming a part of the other family. So, but he would still do something for her. But since the boys were going to stay on his side of the family, they would get the inheritance, and the oldest son would get twice as much as all the other brothers. So since there's only 2 boys, the oldest brother is going to get 2/3 of his dad's estate, and the younger brother is going to get 1/3. That's how the math works in the Torah. And then so the younger son comes to the dad and says, I want my inheritance now. Okay, now this upset everybody who's there, and I'll tell you the reason why. Is because what this guy was essentially saying is, Dad, I wish you were dead. Give me your crap now. Okay. Excuse me? I love my sons with all of my heart. I have 2 of them. I do. I have 2 sons. Love them with all of my heart. And if either one of my boys came up to me and said, Dad, I wish you were dead. Give me your crap now. Woo! I would send them to my mama's house because she would straighten them out. That's what Marilyn would do. Right? Like that. I would not, okay, first of all, Now you're breaking the fifth commandment. Don't honor your father and mother. And according to the Torah, the punishment for dishonoring your mother and father was that your parents could bring you to the city gate where the elders of the city sat to hear cases. And your dad could make an accusation against you. And if it was found to be true, the elders of the city would take you outside of the city, and all of the fathers in the city would stone you to death with rocks. So the punishment for coming to your dad and saying, I wish you were dead, give me my crap now. Oh, yours, but it's mine now. Is that he would die. Like that was that is what really would happen. So the idea that any Jewish guy would ever come to his dad and say, I wish you were dead, like that's so far beyond the pale. Like that's so, like there's no way that would never happen. It's just like, that would never, right? Like anybody else being able to pick up Thor's hammer. It just never happens, right? It's just like nobody else can do this. You just can't pick up Thor's, like you just wouldn't, you can't do it. So the idea that a son would come to his dad and say that was just, it was unnecessarily offensive. Now the religious leaders in the crowd are going, all right, now you're just being stupid. But then the idea that the dad would actually do it is flippin' insane. So that when Jesus says, so the guy gives him a third of his estate, okay, everybody listening to Jesus has just lost their flippin' minds. Like they're all waiting to rebut this one, because this is just the dumbest story they've ever heard. Then the youngest son, according to the story, goes into a far country. And according to Jesus' story, the younger son wastes one third of his debt. They have servants, they have land. So one third of my estate you could go through pretty quickly. 1/3 of this man's estate is going to take some time, and he wastes all of it, Jesus said, on prostitutes and parties. That's what Jesus said the guy did with it. After he's lost everything, he says, you know what, even entry-level workers that work on my dad's farm, even immigrant workers on my dad's farm, right? Like even the lowest of what they would consider in their culture, even those guys have it better than what I do, because now he's homeless and he's begging. And he said, maybe I'm no longer worthy to be called his son, but maybe if I went home, my dad would give me a minimum wage job on the farm. Maybe he would do that. So he practices this speech, right? We get the whole speech and part of Jesus' story. Then the son comes walking, however far, it was a far country, so who knows how long it took him to get back. And Jesus said that the dad was waiting for the son to come home. And when the dad sees the son a long way off, the dad runs out to the son. Okay, now they're just like, now people are probably shouting Jesus down in the middle of the story, like in Middle Eastern cultures, they're taking off shoes and throwing it at George Bush. Remember that? When they got mad at something that he said? Like people in the back of the crowd are taking off flip-flops and they're throwing them at Jesus, right? Not the Billabong ones, those are expensive. They were keeping those flip-flops on. I'm sure they were just Old Navy ones. You can get those for $2.99. Right? So they're throwing flip-flops at, like, it's that crazy, because in those days, dad doesn't run for nobody. Right? Like, dad doesn't run to anybody. In fact, if anything, you ought to be running to dad. No, you shouldn't be running to dad. You ought to be crawling to dad. Oh, and I know, crawling over broken glass. That's how you ought to be coming to dad. But the idea that the dad would stand up and disgrace himself by running in public is just, what? And then the son starts the speech. Father, I am no longer fit to be called your son. And that's all he essentially gets out of his mouth, because the dad hugs him, right? Hugs him. He doesn't say, are you sorry? Like, were you, like, right? Doesn't make the son came back. That's all he wanted. Just come back. Doesn't make him crawl over broken glass, doesn't pay him, he didn't have to sign any contracts to repay all of the money that he wasted on partying. He just yells back to a servant at the house, bring out a robe, bring out my robe for his son, bring out sandals for his feet, and the signet ring for his finger. And all three of those have a different meaning in Jewish culture that we're not going to get to for the sake of time. But I think the quickest one to explain would be the shoe part, is because servants had to take off their shoes when they walked into the home only a family member could walk into the house with sandals on. So it's that idea that the dad was restoring the son with full rights and privileges as being the son, and that's when everybody lost their mind. And then the oldest son comes home, and he's like ticked because the dad's having a party, and they've been fattening a calf, waiting for a good reason to celebrate. And the older son was probably. He's like the sheep. He's like the 99 sheep that never strayed away. He's like the 9 coins that never got lost. He's the son that never ran away. And he's upset that the dad, like we've been saving that. And like, I never ran away. Like, I didn't blow any of the money on prostitutes and parties. And I never disgraced you and publicly humiliated you in front of all of our business associates. Like, I've never done any of this. Like, I was a good kid, and you never one time offered to throw a stupid party for me. Like, I've done everything right my whole life. But you're going to celebrate when that scumbag, who's dirtied our name for who knows how many generations, comes back? And the dad looks at the son and he said, all that I have is yours. You should have been the one to throw the party for him with me. And then Jesus drops the mic and walks off. There's something that all 3 of those stories have in common, and that's this. Your distance from God has never affected your value to God. That's awesome. Because nobody else loves me like this. I could do enough to Billie Jane, my wife, to make her not love me anymore. I could. You know I could. You may have done that to somebody in your past. That there's somebody that used to love you, and maybe you would recognize that the fault is on your part, and you push them away. And maybe you carry a lot of shame over that. And for you, it put a little dent in your football card, so it's not worth as much. It's not meant anymore. Right? So I feel that sense. That's how it works in my relationship with you. That's how it's going to work with God. And Jesus gives you 3 stories to say, you're wrong. Your distance from me has never affected your value to me. What I want to end with is the things that make these stories different. And what makes them different is the reason why each of those 3 items were lost. The sheep was lost out of ignorance. It didn't know any better. It's just a dumb sheep. I don't mean dumb like stupid. I'm just saying it just didn't have enough information, right? Didn't even know that it was lost. It's just a sheep. And there are some of us, I don't know, maybe you're watching at home and you're not religious, but you never really had a good shot. Your mom and dad weren't Christians. They weren't good Christians. Like you weren't raised in church. You didn't know any better. Like, it's just like Christianity's never been a part of your narrative, so you're far from God. And it's out of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance like stupidity. I mean just ignorance like you didn't have access to the information. And then there are those who are like the coin. It's not really ignorance. It's somebody's fault. It's just not your fault. It'd be negligence. See, the coin was lost because the woman wasn't paying attention. She wasn't taking care of her responsibilities. She wasn't maintaining the equipment. She wasn't caring for what was in her possession, what she was responsible for, and because of that, it got lost. And there are some of us who are spiritually disconnected from God, and it is somebody's fault. It's just not yours. Like every time you tried church, it felt like somebody was punching you in the face. Like the moment they found out that you had a sexual past, the moment that they found out that you were just not as clean and pretty as everybody else, on the inside, they treated you different on the outside. So it is somebody's fault. It's just not yours. And then then the son, oh boy, had nobody to blame. He had a great dad. Right? He had a perfect childhood. He's probably raised in temple. And there are some of you guys, you've been raised in church your whole life. Your grandma made sure of it. or your mom made sure of it, or your dad made sure of it. You had good Sunday school teachers. You've been loved. But for some reason, when you hit high school or you hit middle school or college or when you got married or after your divorce or at some other point, some different broken, hard place in your life, you became like Captain Dan in Forrest Gump when he tied himself to the top of the mast in the hurricane and metaphorically flipped off God and said, do your freaking worst. I hate you. All right? And so you're far from God. And it is your fault. And you feel like you can't come back because you haven't been punished enough. Like somehow I need to make amends for this and I need to even the score so that I can feel okay coming back. Right? And you're far from God out of rebellion. And here's one of the last things I want you to know. God doesn't care why you are far from him. He only cares that you still are. Just come back. That's it. All you've got to do is just stop running. And can I say to those of you guys who are Christians, that we assign value to people that we work with and people that are in our family based on the stats on the back of their football card. And we will determine who is worthy and who is not worthy. But it doesn't matter if your brother-in-law is far from God because of ignorance, negligence, or rebellion. It doesn't matter. Like the only person it matters to is you. Quit freaking judging them. You're not to be their judge. You're to be their advocate. You know what the difference between a judge and an advocate? The advocate is on the team of the person who is guilty to do whatever it takes to help them be reconciled to the rest of society. That's your job, is to be their advocate. And that's what I'm asking you to do. The last thing I'll say is this. The first story shows me the priority of those who are far from God over those who've been found. Harbor.Church does not exist to provide religious goods and services for religious people. Harbor.Church isn't for Christians. Harbor.Church is Christians. And we're here for everybody else who ain't yet. That's who we're here for. So it's a priority of those who are far from God over those who've been found. The second story tells me the amount of work I'm supposed to be willing to go through to make sure that those who are far from God get a chance to be found. She swept the whole house. I do whatever it takes, and I keep doing it until I find them. And the third story is how much grace and forgiveness, how much junk we're willing to go through to bring people back. I don't know where you fit in Luke chapter 15, but I hope you know. I'm going to ask all of us, if you would, to bow our head. And we'll pray and talk to God. And if you're distant from God, and you've got reasons why, I want you to know that the reasons only matter to you. Doesn't matter to God. He just wants you back. So if you're tired of running from him, and while you would say, I am no longer worthy to be called your son, if you would just let me work in the field, you would hear God say, welcome home. So your prayer is, God, forgive me for all of my sin, all of my dirt. I accept Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as the only thing that makes the slate clean. And I will give you my heart and my life if you make me yours. Can you make that prayer? If you're already a follower of Jesus, I want you to think of the people in your life that feel most unloved by you. Who is it? Who would probably feel most unloved by you? And I'm asking if you can be a little bit more like Jesus and change their opinion of your opinion of them. God, I pray that your will is being done right now in each one of our hearts and our lives. We ask this in Jesus' name, and we all say together, amen.